we're going to go back into the election of 1860. We're going to get into the election of 1860 and get an idea of why things are going to happen in chapter 16, the way things are going to happen, which finishes the chapter for us. So last time we had class Thursday, if I remember right, I told you that we might be having a quiz today. Like we might finish and then review for a few minutes and then take a short quiz. We're not going to do that. We're going to finish and then we'll do a Kahoot together for a review. And then on Thursday, we'll take that quiz and we'll start chapter 16. So that's the plan as of right now. So I shifted it around. I figured nobody ever complains if I move something back. In fact, just a quick show of hands for curiosity. How many of you remember that you might be having a quiz today? Yeah, exactly. So it's probably a good thing that I pushed it back a little bit. For your quiz, the Kahoot will help for sure. At least it'll refresh to you what you need to know. And if you're going to go back and study, because there is no study guide this time, it's going to be, I think, 15 questions. I'm actually going to write it third block today. People and vocab are going to be the things that are going to stand out in this chapter. So as you go back, clicking through your notes, trying to remember what do you need to know, it's people and vocab. Those two things are going to be the big things for us. So election of 1860 and the review. Now, I can't remember if I used this analogy last week or not with a firecracker. Did we talk about a firecracker?
Yes, we did, yeah.
Okay, so what we have, just as a review, for those of you that are like, well, I got two people that remember it, but the rest of you probably don't. The Civil War is kind of like a firecracker that's sitting in your hand. If you go to Missouri and buy those illegal firecrackers, the big ones that really blow stuff up good, if it's just sitting in the palm of your hand, does it have any... is there any threat to that firecracker harming you?
No.
Not really. Is the potential there for that firecracker to blow off your fingers?
Yes.
The potential is there, but what's needed or what has to take place for that firecracker to do any damage?
Fire.
Got to have fire. So the election of 1860 is going to be like the spark or the flame that lights the fuse that is the Civil War. That's why the election is so important. And for some of you, it won't take you very long based on learning about the election in the fall of 2020. It won't take you very long to figure out what's wrong with the election of 1860 that creates some massive major issues. So I'm going back into the notes. If you're not there, get in your fill-in notes, please. And I'll back it up to where I think we are, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong. We did the Bamman, right? Preston Brooks beat up Charles Sumner, right? You remember that? Bam, bam, bam. Did we look at this slide?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start there because I think that's a good place to start. Abraham Lincoln's top hat. Now, we're past this, right?
Where's the one on 30?
Okay, we'll get caught up in a minute. But I think I told you that I had a reenactment of, well, not a reenactment, a reproduction of Abraham Lincoln's hat. Now, this is it. It's not accurate height-wise. You can see from the picture that the hat that I've got is nowhere near accurate. Abraham Lincoln's hat was about 8 inches from brim to top. This one's probably, 16, 14 inches. So it's meant to be kind of goofy looking, but to put it into perspective, because I told you that Abraham Lincoln had a 7 1/4 head. That's a peanut head for a man that's 6'4" tall, though he wasn't very heavy. Excuse me, he was a big dude. So just to kind of give you an idea of how big Abraham Lincoln's head was, it doesn't even come close to fitting. Now, I have a gigantic head. So if we put it on Mike, it's going to fit perfectly. See? So Abraham Lincoln and Mike, that actually makes you look pretty good, Mike. Maybe you should keep that. Are you suffocating in there? Anyway, Abraham Lincoln's head was bigger than Big Mike's head. But compared to mine, he's got a little teeny tiny peanut. Now, maybe there's a more appropriate hat for Mike. Some of you didn't think he looked Abraham Lincoln enough because he can't grow a beard. Which, by the way, I have a really good Abraham Lincoln beard story that I'll share with you at some point. But maybe this would be more appropriate for Mike.
Rainbow hat.
He's a
Yeah,
clown.
You like rainbow hat.
Or maybe this one, you know? This probably look better on Mike.
Yep. That's the one.
It's a hat arsenal. What are you talking about?
I know, I'm saying it's very interesting.
Once, if you're a history teacher, you need just.
World War II soldier.
No, his needs to be
Kinda
more
little,
feminine.
I have lots of cool stuff. I don't know, maybe even more likely that Mike would be Dr.
Oh, yeah.
Seuss.
You should put all of those on Friday. It's
Oh,
Crazy
no.
Hat Day.
What's it's Hat Day Friday?
Yeah.
Nobody even told me.
It was on the
Okay,
announcement.
and then we
the
got
other day.
Abraham Lincoln slippers, and I don't have any reenactment of Abraham Lincoln slippers. I have like these moccasins at home that have fur in them. They're really nice. Okay, we watched the video, not this one, but another one because this link was broken, and it kind of gave you an idea of. Is this where we're at? I don't know which one slide 30 is. Is this close to 30?
It's 28.
Okay, but when we watched that, or when you watched that clip of Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas debating, the one thing that really should stand out as different, because even though last fall you might not have been all that interested in the debates between President Trump and President Biden, the one thing that really stands out as different when we watched the Lincoln and Douglas debate, both of them were kind of shooting arrows at each other, you know, saying kind of nasty things, but not really personal attacks, which seems to be a normal thing in modern debates. But they say bad things. How often in that 6-minute clip of Lincoln and Douglas debating did one of them interrupt the other one?
Not at all.
Not even once. If you watched any of the presidential debates last fall, how often did Trump interrupt Biden or Biden interrupt Trump?
Every minute.
It's annoying and childish, right? I mean, who couldn't watch that and think, are these really the men that we're selecting to be the most powerful man on the planet? And they can't just sit there and be quiet for 2 minutes until it's their turn to talk? Kind of frustrating. So I guess I'm more of a fan of the old school style where you get a chance to defend yourself, but wait till it's your turn. But then again, on the flip side, they weren't near as personal. And it seemed like President Trump and President Biden tried to be personal. And I don't know that that's necessary or not. So both guilty, one maybe more so than the other, but we don't need to debate that. The point is that politics and debate and civility, just being a good person, seems to have changed a little bit from the way it was back then. Now, I say that right after I taught you a lesson of a man that nearly beats another man to death with a stick. So maybe we're not that far off either. So history has lots of stories. Harper's Ferry stuff, that's a review for you. We already did that. So this should be where we're at. Does that sound better? Is this 30? Now, your slide numbers are off from mine just a little bit because I think I have maybe a few more slides than you do, or a few less even. So where you think we are and where I think we are aren't necessarily going to always be the same. So, election of 1860. Here we got Abraham Lincoln. He's probably the most recognizable face in American history. There is a really good story that goes with his beard. It wasn't until the election, or leading up till the election of 1860, that Abraham Lincoln first grew a beard. And there's a cute reason why, a really nice reason. You don't have to look it up. I'll share that story with you some other day when we have a little bit more time. But what maybe is kind of interesting is Lincoln really struggled to grow that beard. You know, some of you have a dad that he shaves in the morning and then by 3 o'clock in the afternoon he probably needs to shave again. Anybody's dad that hairy? Yeah. Some people are like that and could grow a full beard in maybe 2 weeks, maybe less time than that. Abraham Lincoln took over 3 months to grow this beard. So it was kind of fuzzy and scraggly, and then it started filling in. Anyway, so there's a really interesting story about that. That has nothing to do with the election of 1860, but yet again, maybe it does. You kind of have to also consider, does he look more handsome with a beard? And someone earlier said, did all men wear beards because they were lazy and ugly? Well, if you look up at the wall of presidents that I've got along the top of the wall, no beard, no beard, no beard, no beard, no beard. And we get all the way to Abraham Lincoln before we have a bearded president. None of those guys had beards. George Washington shaved, and John Adams shaved, and Thomas Jefferson shaved. That guy there has some chops. But Abraham Lincoln's got a beard. But look what that does to the next presidents. So Abraham Lincoln, and then Andrew Johnson, who wasn't elected, he was Abraham Lincoln's vice president. So how did he become president?
Abraham Lincoln died.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln had lead poisoning. Get it? Oh, yeah, so, but look, beard, kind of beard, choppy looking thing. Mustache, it's a nice mustache, Grover. Beard, no beard, mustache. So we got some hairy guys afterward because Abraham Lincoln was setting precedents. So prior to Lincoln, maybe it was considered an unclean thing to have a beard as a president. But Lincoln then says, it's okay. So in this election, we're going to have an issue. So I'm going to break the class down, and I'm actually supposed to be recording this lesson because I'm going to be gone 5th block today. So for my people 5th block that might be listening to this, I want you to use your imagination a little bit because you can't see me, you can only see the screen. So I have 2 rows on my right side of the classroom, and there are 6 students in those 2 rows. So the 6 students in the 2 rows on my right side of the classroom, just for sake of understanding the example that I'm going to give here, and I don't care what your politics are, we're not here to argue that or debate that. You just have to be my guinea pigs for this experiment. You 6 students are Republicans in the election of 1860. 2 rows of Republicans. Now, in the middle, I've got 2 rows with 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 students. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Mike, let's see. You, and you, so 3 of my 8 students. You guys got my numbers all jacked up. Redo. Rewind. Does that sound like a rewind thing? That was my. Okay, so rewind. Just back up. Back up the bus just a little bit. In my 2 middle rows, I have 8 students. The 8 students in my 2 middle rows, you guys are Republicans in the election of 1860. All right, so 5th grade class. I just redid that because my numbers were all jacked up. My 2 rows on my right side, there are 6 students in those 2 rows. So 8 in the middle, 6 on the right side. You guys are Northern Democrats. Northern Democrats. My 2 rows over here on the left side, you guys are, there's 4 of them. There could be a few more, but there's 4 of them. You guys are Southern Democrats.
Wait, does this mean all slaves? Since you're Southern?
Not necessarily, but likely so. So,
No.
my middle rows are Republicans. Quiet, please. My middle rows are Republicans. 8 of them. On the right, we have 6 Northern Democrats. And on the left, we have 4 Southern Democrats. Based on what I just said, and only what I just said, who wins the election of 1860?
No, Democrats.
Look how many 6 we got.
10.
Yeah, you got 1.
Okay, so I got some people, for those of you in 5th block that can't see what we're talking about here, that say the Democrats are going to win because if we add up the 6 Northern Democrats on the right side of the classroom and the 4 on the left side of the classroom, that's 10 Democrats versus 8 Republicans. So according to what I just pointed out, the Democrats should win this election. There are more of them. But, this is a big but, not a little but, the Democrat Party splits. So I pointed out very clearly that 2 rows were Northern Democrats and 2 rows were Southern Democrats. Each is going to have their own candidate. Does that change the answer as to who's going to win this election?
Republican.
There's 8 Republicans. Who are my 8 Republicans voting for?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
That's cool.
Well, let's take a look at who the other candidates are in this election. This is a big mistake that's made by the political parties. In the North, they choose Stephen Douglas. This is the same guy that already defeated Abraham Lincoln once. Stephen Douglas didn't necessarily love slavery, but Stephen Douglas was a big believer in what's called popular sovereignty. So let the people decide. Now, when you think about that, that doesn't sound like that bad of a thing to give control to the states over making their own decisions. When we think about it that way, if we look at Nebraska, would you rather be in charge of Nebraska's, handling the debt of Nebraska, the budget of Nebraska, or the debt and the budget of California? Who do you think does a better job of making decisions with the money of the people that belong to the people of the states in the form of taxes? Okay, Nebraska is like one of almost no states that has what's called a balanced budget amendment. It is law in the state of Nebraska that our budget has to balance. We can't spend more money than we have. In California, on the flip side, they have hundreds of billions of dollars in debt because they spend more money than their taxpayers bring in, just like our federal government does. So in Nebraska, it's kind of like more like my house. I don't borrow money to buy stuff that I can't afford just to buy because I don't like spending my money. I'll only spend what I have. So that's kind of an issue for us. But Stephen Douglas, popular sovereignty, let the states pick. That's not means he doesn't love slaves, but he certainly isn't against slavery. In the South, they pick a guy named John Breckinridge who is pro-slave, which means he supports slavery. Well, let's throw in even a bigger mistake. There's another candidate from a splinter party named John Bell. And he's from a political party called the Constitutional Union Party. It's not Democrat or Republican. So we've got 2 Democrat candidates, a Constitutional Union candidate, and 1 Republican candidate. It's almost like the perfect storm to take place for Abraham Lincoln to win this election. Remember, he already lost once to Stephen Douglas. So let's take a look at what happens. This is a map of, I'm going to ask you some questions on this to do some recall. So 5th block, you can be thinking about it too. And I'll try to go slow enough. And my class isn't going to blurt out any answers. And when they answer, I'll repeat it because I know it's difficult to hear on the computer. But this is how the election of 1860 breaks down. We're going to call the northern states, we're going to call that color coral. Because that's what my classes yesterday decided that color was. I called it pink, but the problem is there's another pink. So I guess we could say dark pink. I tried to call it salmon, but my student said it's not orange enough. Salmon has just a little bit of orange in it. So we're going with coral. That's like Maine and Minnesota and California. That's coral. And then we've got a dark blue, a light blue, and a pink. All of the states that are coral cast their electoral votes for Abraham Lincoln. All of the states, I'm really struggling to talk today. All of the states that are dark blue, so we have Missouri and part of New Jersey, voted for Stephen Douglas. That's my northern Democrats. All the pink, they cast their votes for John Bell, the Constitutional Unionist. And all the light blue were my southern Democrats, and they voted for John Breckinridge. So the vote was split between 4 candidates. In the election of 2020, trick question, were there more than 2 candidates?
No.
Yes.
Yes, there were.
They weren't.
So why, this was only a couple months ago, why would I have people say no if there were more than 2 candidates?
They didn't sponsor.
Because the other candidates were small enough that they really didn't make that big of a difference in the election. In this election of 1860, there were more than 2 candidates, and they all have an impact. This is going to cause some issues.
I have a question.
Yes, what's your question?
Why did most of the West Coast didn't even vote?
like this here in the middle?
Yeah.
Okay, good question. Anything that's not colored in isn't a state yet, it's just a territory at this time. So they're not voting as a state. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. That's why it's not all of America. Nebraska doesn't have a vote because Nebraska doesn't become a state until 1867. So thank you for asking. All right, here's where we struggled a little bit yesterday. Eventually people got the answer, but it took us some time to get there. What are, raise your hands please, the numbers inside each of those states? What is that supposed to represent? What do we call those votes that your state gets in it? Yes, they're electoral votes. Very good. So here's the tricky part. Now, that was a difficult question yesterday that my 4 blocks of class kind of struggled with. We ultimately got to it, but we struggled with it. How do we decide how many electoral votes each state gets? Aiden?
On the side of the state.
Well, California is huge, and it only has 4. You're not completely wrong. The population, you're closer.
Do they divide the states? And like 4 different parts of each?
Kinda. So each state's electoral votes are determined based on the number of representatives that each state sends to the Senate and the House of Representatives. So every state has 2 senators. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. Every state has 2 senators. So can you tell me how many people in the election of 1860 did Iowa send to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C.?
2.
Mike says 2. Why do you say 2, Michael?
Because,
They have 2 senators, which means they must have 2 representatives. Let's try a tougher one. Go over to Pennsylvania. They have 27 electoral votes. How many members of the House of Representatives from Pennsylvania?
13. 13. You wouldn't go 14 because that's 28, so you have to go 13.
Let's try this again. Every state has 2 senators. So how many does Pennsylvania send to the House of Representatives?
2.
You guys are all going to fail the citizenship test. Who said 25?
I literally was saying 25 for like 5.
Okay, I got a couple people that said 25. So 25ers, explain to me how it's 25.
Because 2 people are going to the House of Representatives, the rest of the people, 25.
2 people to the Senate, 25 to the House of Representatives. Let's try one more because I got some people that are confusable. Every state has 2 senators. It's automatic. So subtract 2 from the number. How about South Carolina? 8 people go to the Electoral College. How many members of the House of Representatives does South Carolina have? 6. We're getting there. Very good. So we can figure that out. So almost all of the Northerners cast their votes for Abraham Lincoln. That's the coral. Now, almost all of those states are winner take all, which means they didn't necessarily all vote for Abraham Lincoln, but he got the majority of votes in those states. So what's the deal with why do those northern states like New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, why do they have big numbers? And then we go down into the south and we see North Carolina 10, South Carolina 8, Georgia, Florida. Okay, because the population is lower, they don't send as many people to the House of Representatives, therefore they don't get as many electoral votes. So who wins the election of 1860 based on the map that you're looking at right here? Abraham Lincoln. Yes, Hayden.
Why is New Jersey striped?
Split their votes, just like Nebraska does. So it says on here, and it's hard for you guys to read it, but it says New Jersey split their electoral votes. Lincoln gets 4 and Douglas gets 3, Stephen Douglas. So today the only 2 states that will split their electoral votes are Nebraska and Maine. So at that time, at least in the election of 1860, New Jersey was a splitter also. Okay, here's another map that's very, very similar. In fact, it's the same map, just different colors. But this one gives us the key down at the bottom. So it might be easier to see on your computer screen as you're looking through your notes. But this shows electoral votes and popular vote. So Abraham Lincoln, we'll just look at the electoral vote column for a minute. Gets 180 electoral votes because he gets all of these orange states, the ones that were coral on the other map. Stephen Douglas gets 12 electoral votes because he gets Missouri and part of New Jersey. John Breckinridge, 72. He did better than Stephen Douglas because he got the entire South. And then John Bell, 39. So let's just pretend for a minute that Abraham Lincoln only has to go against one other candidate, and the other candidate wins all of the other electoral votes. So what's 12 and 72? 84. 84 and 39, that's a little more difficult.
133.
That's 133, 123, 133. So even if there is only one other candidate, who wins? Still Abraham Lincoln. He's got 180 electoral votes. Okay, so everyone's like, geez, the Electoral College is broken. This is a piece of junk. Let's look over here at the popular vote. Popular vote just means who all voted. Total up the vote, that's how many people. Abraham Lincoln has 1.8 million votes in the popular vote. Stephen Douglas, let's just round it up to 1.4 million. So he was close, even though he gets last place in the Electoral College, he had the second most votes. Because a lot of Northerners voted for him, but not enough for him to win votes from the Electoral College. Breckinridge, let's just say 1 million, because we're going to do some math here in a minute. So we'll say 1.4 million, 1 million, and we'll just round this down to 500,000, half a million. So 1 million, 1.4, and 1 million, that's 2.4 million. Almost 3 million people voted for one of the candidates that was not Abraham Lincoln. 1.8 million people voted for Abraham Lincoln. So if you voted for one of the other candidates, how do you feel about the outcome of this election?
It's rigged.
It's rigged! It's not fair! This stinks! We hear this all the time. Is it possible today, in our modern system, not the 1860 system, in the modern system, to win the popular vote, meaning you get more votes but you lose the election?
Yes, it happened to Donald Trump, didn't it?
In his first election in 2016, Hillary Clinton had more popular votes, but Donald Trump won the Electoral College.
This election, dead people.
Now, the one thing I want to warn you about, because it looks to almost every outsider, it looks like the Electoral College is really, really a broken thing. Like, that isn't right. The issue is, for a small population state like Nebraska, the Electoral College gives us a little bit bigger voice. Otherwise, the huge population centers, the big cities in America, would make most of the decisions. So it's a goofy system, but it's probably a good idea that we don't just totally scrap it. If we come up with a different system that's more equitable, that might be okay. But the mistake that the Democrats make is they allow multiple candidates. Now, you guys have probably completely blotted this out from your mind, because I know by the time November rolled around, and then even into December and early January, we were so sick of hearing about President Trump and President-elect Biden. And we were tired of watching campaign commercials, and we were tired of watching debates, and it really kind of wore us down. Do you think that's a true statement?
Yes.
Yeah, so now that it's over, we're like, don't care. In fact, now that it's over, and we're 2 months into Joe Biden's presidency, has the world come to an end like everyone predicted it would that loved Donald Trump? No. Maybe you don't get exactly what you want, but come on, it's not that bad. We just deal with it, and that's how the system, that's why the system has worked for as long as it has. But if you remember a year ago, so if you were sitting in Mr. LeGrand's class in 7th grade, probably spending at least some time mixed in with your world history, talking a little bit about the political system, did you do that? You better answer this right because he's covering my class 5th block today. So you better say, yeah, we did a little bit, because I bet you did. This time last year, the Democrats were going through a series of debates, and there were like 13 or 14 candidates for president from the Democratic Party. Do you remember that? It wasn't just Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and some tall, skinny guy from Texas that I can't remember his name. There were 13 or 14 of them, and they'd get on a big stage and they'd argue, and then pretty soon the Democrat Party realized we got to narrow this down to one candidate, because if we have more than one candidate, we're going to have a repeat of the election of 1860. Two Democrats would split the vote. So by, I think, July, I'm not really sure what the date was, the Democrats had a big party. Now, since it's a COVID year, it wasn't really a big party. It was more like a Zoom party. But all of the state Democrat candidates, or excuse me, all of the state Democrats got together from each state, and they decided we'll cast our vote for Joe Biden. And they did that because each state held either a primary or a caucus to narrow it down to their favorite candidate. So after the Democratic National Convention, that's their big party, they said, our man is Joe Biden. So if you're a Democrat, you're all supposed to come together and support Joe Biden. The Republicans did the same thing, but because Donald Trump was already established, there wasn't a whole lot of resistance to him. So some Republicans didn't like it, but there weren't other candidates that were really going to knock him off of the top. We'll probably see the opposite happen in 2024. There'll probably be a dozen Republicans on the stage fighting for that one Republican spot, and Joe Biden on the Democrat side wanting to be reelected. He's old, and there's a lot of unpredictable things, but I don't wish ill will upon anyone, and you should not either if you're a good human. So they got to narrow it down to one. There's been talk of a third party. There are third, fourth, fifth, sixth political parties, but none of them super strong. What if in this last election, Bernie Sanders was upset and he said, I'm going to run anyway. And he creates his own political party. There were a lot of Democrats that really liked Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders would have decided to run for president against Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who would have won the election of 2020?
Bernie Sanders.
I got some people that say Bernie Sanders. So you would have Donald Trump, the Republican, against Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
Well, a Democrat would at least win.
Joe Biden would
Why do you say, Marcus, why do you say Donald Trump would win? Yeah, because Bernie Sanders is going to take some of Joe Biden's voters, right?
I didn't know.
And then Donald Trump's going to win. So Bernie Sanders had to get out of the way to make room for Joe Biden. And Bernie Sanders had to step to the side and say, all of my supporters, I need you to vote for Joe Biden, because he didn't want Biden to win either, because he thought he was the guy. But he certainly would rather have Biden than Trump. So politics are kind of confusing, and this election is not. It's not an exception to that. So too many candidates. The system wasn't built for political candidates anywhere, political parties anywhere, certainly candidates. The system was supposed to be different. Remember George Washington, don't have political parties, and then bam, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So here's what happens. Lincoln's election ticks off the Southerners. If we look at this map, all of the South voted for a different guy, so they feel my vote doesn't matter. So it's kind of like if you're the angry kid and you go to Arbor Park in the summer, you bring a football and you're going to play football, all your buddies show up, and you somehow get picked and you get put on, this would be horrible, you get put on the team with Harry. You're like, I can't win. I got Harry on my team. Every time Harry plays, we lose. This is horrible. And it's the third quarter, and you're just getting smoked because Harry keeps fumbling and he throws interceptions, and he's just awful. I'm just kidding, Harry. Don't hate me yet. So you decide in the third quarter just to take your ball and leave. You brought the ball, and you ruined the game for everyone. That's what the Southern states are going to do here because they feel like they don't count. As good as you are, Harry is so bad that he screwed up the whole game.
Ooh.
I don't know who I have in fifth block that I could use as an example, so probably Bob. Bob screwed up the whole game, so we got to do something else. By the way, I want you to look at this map for a second. Actually, you keep your slideshow on this map. I'm going to back up to this one. Is that what I want to do? No, that's not what I want to do. Hold that thought. So, some southern states decide to secede. The word kind of looks like succeed, but it's not. It's secede. It means to withdraw, just to leave. South Carolina is the first state. They said, if you elect Abraham Lincoln, we're leaving. We're going to take our ball and leave the playground. So South Carolina goes, they immediately form their own country, and they call it the Confederate States of America. Interestingly enough, and you probably don't need to Google this, you can use the context that I'm talking about here. What do you think the word Confederacy or Confederate means if you Google the dictionary definition of it? What would a Confederacy of states be? Group. What's United States mean? Group. What's the difference? It's the same thing. They stole our name. They just used a different word. It's like they went to the, what's that book that has synonyms in it that you use something? They went to a thesaurus, yeah. And they're like, what means the same as united? Oh, Confederacy? Let's use They're the same. They stole the Constitution from the United States and then they just altered it. Why start from scratch? You know, if we decide to start our own country on the moon, we're not going to start it completely over. We're going to steal the things that we like that we have here and then modify them. You know, we'll add a 29th Amendment to the Constitution that says Big Mike is not allowed to be president, ever.
What do you mean?
It's to keep us safe as a country because we all know what would happen if Big Mike were allowed to be in
What
charge.
would happen if Matthew was president?
Well, if Big Mike was in charge,
How about
dictatorship.
me or Biden? Me or Biden?
Big Mike, you would be like a nice version of Kim Jong-un. I know. I can see it now. And they elect their own president, Jefferson Davis. So this is the map I want you to stick with. Okay, so leave this map on your slideshow. The red states on this map are the states that decide to secede. So they're slave states that are tired of being part of the Union. They're also states that just feel like their voice isn't heard. So I'm going to back up on mine. You stay on that one. Okay, anybody see anything wrong with the red states that you see on the states that decided to secede? What's missing on the map that you have on your computer screen that is slave on the map that I'm showing here? Aiden?
Tennessee is a slave state in this map and not on that map. Well, it's red. Then Kentucky is.
Kentucky or Tennessee?
Tennessee is red.
Tennessee's red, and on this map, Tennessee is slave. The blue, the yellow, and the pink are all slave.
Okay.
So you're on the right track, though. Look just north of Tennessee on your red and orange map. Kentucky is a slave state, but they don't secede. Any others? Missouri is a slave state, but it doesn't secede. Any others? Delaware is a slave state that doesn't secede. Any others? Maryland is a slave state that doesn't secede. Well, look at Virginia, though.
It's not split into two
It
parts.
looks pregnant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what's the deal with Virginia that doesn't quite look right according to a map of Virginia today?
There's not a West Virginia.
Yeah, I'm going to make up the number, but I'm probably pretty close. Like 54 counties in the northwestern part of Virginia, when Virginia decided to secede, 54 counties said, whoa, we don't want to secede. So they actually seceded from Virginia, created their own state, West Virginia, and remained loyal to the Union. So we have a baby state born because of the Civil War. In the Union, they decided that secession was unconstitutional, so even Abraham Lincoln's like, they don't have the power to do that. And by the way, Lincoln was saying, don't leave, please don't leave. If you don't leave, I promise I won't touch the issue of slavery. But unfortunately, they did not listen. In his inaugurational address, he says, we are not enemies, we are friends. We must not be enemies. Holy smokes. It's almost like today. If you watch the news and you're paying attention, if you're a Democrat, it seems like the news wants you to hate Republicans. And if you're a Republican, you're supposed to hate Democrats. We're not enemies, we're friends. We can be. We can have differences of opinion and not hate each other. But the media and America today wants us to seem to think that we're supposed to hate on each other. Though passion have strained us. Yes, we're passionate people. And it strains our point of view on things, and it makes us think that we need to be enemies. It must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching. He's taken us back to the American Revolution that at the time these people's grandparents fought in. Stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave. They gave our lives for us to be friends. To every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land. Will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. This guy has 1 year of education. Does that sound like a guy with 1 year of education? No. Crazy. But it basically says, we will be friends when we figure out that this is the right way to do it. One woman remarked on Lincoln's way to his inauguration, there goes that cursed Illinois ape, the abolitionist, but he will never come back alive. So she's predicting Lincoln's assassination. Lincoln predicted his own assassination, by the way. This is creepy. But what's weird is almost everyone's been through this. Have you ever had something happen in your life, an event, and in your mind you're thinking, I dreamed this was going to happen like 2 weeks ago. Has that ever happened to you? I think they call it deja vu, and it's usually something small. It's not like if I almost never remember my dreams, but that happens sometimes where like I'll trip over a rock, which is pretty common, and I'll be like, I dreamed this exact thing was going to happen. It's never, here are the Powerball numbers for next week. I don't have those kind of dreams, or I go buy a Powerball ticket. Yeah, that's weird. Well, Lincoln was having premonitions. He was having those dreams that he was going to be assassinated. This is a little bit misleading, but this is Lincoln's second inauguration, so it's in 1864 after he's reelected. This is Lincoln here giving his speech. Okay. Now, it's different today. The inauguration for Biden was different in January 20th because the crowd was a lot smaller because of the COVID. But otherwise, it's typically like this. Here we got Supreme Court justices. These are all friends of the president here, the supporters packed in, important people.
But why
Now,
is that lady's head so big?
What?
You see on the second row?
This one?
See Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
I kind of think, I wonder if that's a statue because that does look
Bernie?
big.
Who is this?
Yeah, well, Bernie Sanders was there. What disappoints me is it took 16 minutes for anybody to even see that Bernie. I took a lot of time to put Bernie Sanders into that picture, and Matthew's the only one that even noticed. And I do appreciate that you laughed for me because I was just trying to be funny. I'm not even intending to be disrespectful, but I just thought it would be funny. And he kind of blends in there, doesn't he? Okay, this is the election of 1864. This is not the proper election, but here's an interesting fact that we'll come back to later on. You see this man's face right here? Okay, so what do you think? 30 feet away from the president while he's giving his inauguration address? This man?
Where?
Right here. Can you see my cursor right here?
No, I can't. Oh, yeah.
It's kind of frozen up there. Okay, I'll point to it on the screen. So my cursor is almost above it. This guy right here, John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, he's going to be the assassinator later on. So now we got to wait and see. The South's going to prepare for war. The North is like, what do we do with all those forts in the South? We start to divide. There's military academies in the United States. The men that are from the South go typically to the South. The men from the North stay in the North. the teachers at the military academy, the officers at West Point in New York, and Virginia Military Institute in Virginia. Unfortunately for the Union, probably the best of them were Southerners. So most of them are going to drop their loyalty to the Union and head south. But now it's on. We got to wait and see what Chapter 16 is going to bring as far as the potential for war. So I'm going to exit out